Google Stadia is dead, and thank God for that. For those of you who don't know, Google Stadia was Google's attempt to enter into the cloud gaming market. For those of you who don't know what that is, cloud gaming is where the video game you're playing is physically hosted somewhere very far away. Here's the most simplistic, boomer-friendly explanation. You know how, back in the 1980s, if you were going to play a video game, maybe you had a Nintendo, maybe you had an old computer, the game would appear on the TV or the monitor, but the game itself would be running on the hardware of the PC or the NES. The latency between the device generating the game and the image output on the screen is virtually zero, because they're right beside each other. As technology advanced, people tried and failed to invent working wireless controllers, so you could play video games from further away. Infrared controllers needed a direct line of sight and could be blocked by a passing dust mote, while primitive pre-Bluetooth tech of the 90s added way too much latency. You'd press a button on the controller, and the action in the game might happen a full second later. It was only with the invention of the Wavebird controller for the Nintendo GameCube that wireless controller technology matured enough to actually be on par with a wired experience. What cloud gaming is when the device running your game, the console or the computer, isn't in your living room, but is instead potentially thousands of miles away at one of Google's data centers. The upside of this idea is that you don't have to buy your own console or PC anymore. You can simply connect to the Google Stadia service, pay a monthly subscription fee, and have the games streamed over the internet to your TV screen. Stadia was technically available on any device that could run a Google Chrome browser. PCs, phones, tablets, TVs, and if for some reason your TV couldn't run it, you could buy a little Google Stadia broadcaster dongle thing that clips onto the TV. The cost of actually building or owning the expensive hardware that runs the game is collectivized. Rather than having your brand new PS5 sit there idle when you're not using it, if all of the raw hardware is stored at Google's data centers, it can simply be repurposed for somebody else's game. However, intuitively, it's not hard to understand how this is a bad idea in terms of the actual experience of playing the game. If you think that latency was bad with primitive wireless controllers when you were sitting just a bit too far away from the screen, imagine latency when your game is being played on the other side of the country and transmitted over the internet. According to Google, though, there was no latency. In fact, it was better than playing the game in your own home, due to what they called negative latency. What this actually was a buffer of predicted latency inherent to a Stadia player's setup or connection, in which the Stadia system will run lag mitigation. This can include increasing FPS rapidly to reduce latency between player input and display, or even predicting user inputs. Yes, Google Stadia included AI learning that would come to predict your button presses and execute them before you did in-game, back on their home server, making it feel like you were the one pressing the button at home, but it was them. They were literally going to have the game play itself to overcome the natural limitations of their own business model. Stadia launched in late 2019, and it was pretty obvious to everyone that it was going to be a bomb before it even got out there. That didn't stop them from trying, and initial reviews all voiced the same complaints that we had all predicted. Latency with the games was horrible, with the new Mortal Kombat game in particular being virtually unplayable, featuring several seconds of delay between input and action, making combos and fatalities impossible to pull off. Google blamed this not on their hardware or on the internet, but on the developers who made the games, saying they just didn't know how to do it right on their revolutionary new product. After all, their hardware was more powerful than the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. They've got the 4K gaming experience, as long as you bought the premium subscription. It's everyone else's fault it wasn't working. Developers, of course, had their own take. Google, frankly, didn't pay them enough to get their games working on Stadia. Game selection at launch was also not great. The Stadia started its life with 22 games available, which isn't bad, but they were almost entirely ports of games that were several years old. No exclusives and very few new titles. And a lot of shit just didn't work. Family sharing didn't work. Achievements didn't work. Stadia on iOS didn't work. And on some versions of Chromecast, another Google product, in fact, the prime Google product for this service, Stadia didn't work. For some people, Stadia itself didn't work, as Google failed to provide invite codes with their Stadia subscriptions. And worst of all, in my opinion, was the announcement that Google Stadia games would still cost full price, alongside buying the controller and paying the subscription fee to access the service. Stadia was compared to Netflix because Netflix's model is similar. You don't own the movie or the show. It's stored on the Netflix servers and transmitted to you over the internet, just like the games you play on Stadia. But this is like, in addition to buying the TV and paying for the internet service and paying for your Netflix subscription, you had to pay for every movie or show on Netflix you watched. You own them, and that they're in your library on Netflix, but it's not like you own the physical copy. That's what Stadia was doing. As the service began to mature, people began to take notice of the slow trickle of new games coming out, as well as the lack of improvements to actually make the service, work. The latency problem never really got solved, and the games were shadows of what they were on other platforms. The system's best exclusive game was Super Bomberman R Online, and that moved off Stadia in early 2021 just to try and stay alive. Funnily enough, an editor at Game Informer was told by a Stadia rep that Super Bomberman R Online could never come out on another platform because of the fundamental way the game was programmed. There was also weird oddities that just made people think that Google had no idea what they were doing. Like how the Stadia profile page included areas to input your ICQ number, AIM screen name, MSN Messenger, and Yahoo ID. All services that went the way of the dodo a decade ago. I remember using this shit in high school. Google hand-waved everything by going back to that dry old well of video games controversy.
Sexism in gaming.
Yes, thank you, Frosk. Don't worry, your time will come on this channel. Google vows to fight abuse that could pop up in Stadia communities. Google wants to prevent its new Stadia from being filled up with racists, bigots, and trolls who congregate online. Like, listen to how this is framed. Creating the community could also open the door to abusive conduct and content, a problem that already plagues Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other social media platforms. Tech platforms are under intense scrutiny for failing to police what happens on their services. Google wants to make sure the problems don't reappear on Stadia. They view the internet itself as inherently a racist place. They view their own audience as a problem that needs to be solved. The actual issue is that people are inherently rowdy and edgy and judgy and shitposty, and that's not going to go away with a bit of social engineering from Google. People simply won't use your service. And of course, the old boogeyman is brought up. Discord, a chat app for gamers, has been criticized for being what some say is a safe place for white supremacists and anti-Semites. Gamergate, an online movement that gained steam in 2014, pushed some of the sexist and racist tropes of prevalent in gaming culture. Jesus, CNET, do you proofread your shit before publishing it? It's no surprise that this is the direction Google went with Stadia, as it's the direction they go company-wide. Woke nonsense force-fed to all employees through diversity training seminars and other garbage like that. A lot of the more moronic Stadia-related decisions can be understood through this lens. Like, for example, Google's press packages, including an emphasis on what they call gender-neutral controllers to appeal to women. What exactly made the Google Stadia controller gender-neutral? Well, they made it in green. That's literally it. I don't know about you, but different colored controllers, including green, have been Nintendo's thing since the 90s. I don't think it's progressive or revolutionary. Maybe you have to slap that label on it for it to really count. All of the complaints and issues were covered up on the subreddit r/Stadia because all the moderators of that sub were Google employees. Seriously, Google runs the fan communities of the Stadia and spent the lifespan of the Stadia purging all the bad press and negative customer responses. Despite this, though, fan complaints still kept getting through and going viral because there were just so many of them. Like, pause the video and read some of these for yourself. Look at this one. They just hit the online player limit of 16 people in a single game of Grid for the first time. Usually, nobody is playing anything on the Stadia. This was back in January of 2020, 2 months after launch. The service was dead before it even got off the ground. That didn't stop them from simultaneously announcing expansion plans in March and a free pass in April. Guys, stop throwing money into this black hole. It was no surprise to anyone that Google announced the final shutdown of Stadia a few weeks ago. The only surprise is that the service managed to limp along as far as it did. It will finally close its doors in early 2023, just past the 3-year mark. It was really funny as the last few Stadia users began to notice that Google had stopped talking about the Stadia, stopped updating it, was no longer moderating the subreddit, was no longer replying to anyone, and they had purchased all of these games that might be disappearing soon. What was going to happen to their money and their saves and their games? I've always been a proponent of owning physical copies of games where possible to avoid bullshit like this, but Google actually surprised everyone, saying that they would all get a refund of their game purchases when the service finally closed down. Some companies are offering transfer services to move gamers' save files off Stadia to a different platform, but for other people, they're just shit out of luck. As Stadia closes its doors, the subreddit has gotten really weird. Like, check this out. Rest in peace, Google Stadia, you're awesome. Cloud gaming is sustainable gaming. Why are we using environmentalist activist language here? The bottom of the post reads, the savings in hardware cost, distribution, energy use, etc. that cloud gaming provides because infrastructure is shared doesn't need a cool box and stands in an efficient data center should almost make it a requirement for all next-gen games. Why let people buy an expensive box they hardly play when they can use it in the cloud? Cloud gaming is sustainable gaming. You hear that, pleb? The next part of live in the pod and eat the bugs is going to be play on the cloud. You don't need to own your own stuff. Just rent it from the data center. It's more sustainable. Stop being so selfish and wanting, you know, your own PlayStation. Google spent a lot of time, and I mean a lot, trying to reassure gamers that Stadia was here to stay. But it was all bullshit, blowing smoke up everyone's ass, hoping that their shitty product would catch on. But it never did. We all predicted Stadia's failure before it even got going. Streaming a game from the cloud isn't like streaming music or movies. Those are linear experiences that don't require split-second input from the end user. This is a fundamental problem that won't be solved for a while, considering current advancement in internet speeds. All other cloud gaming services suffer from the same issues. The cloud versions of games on the Switch, the PlayStation Plus cloud stuff, Amazon's Luna, Xbox Game Pass, Nvidia, all of it. All of them suffer from the same 1-2 punch of latency-destroying game experiences, and you losing your purchases and save games when the service eventually dies. At least with PlayStation Plus and Xbox Game Pass, though, it actually functions like a Netflix. You pay your monthly fee, and you can just play a rotating selection of games. And you can download them to your local hardware so you're not trying to play over the internet, too. How many times has Google done this? Google Hangouts, Google Plus, Google Glass, Google Answers, Google Buzz, large chunks of Google Play. There's so much shit Google has invested in and then just dumped, even when it worked very well, like Hangouts and Google Reader. Well, with the death of the Stadia, we finally got an inside leak as to why this keeps happening. The career progression and promotion at Google is based on moving the needle, aka launches. You launch a service or a major overhaul, and you put it in your promo package. No one ever fucking gets promoted for maintaining or fixing something broken. No, it's all about launching products. When something like Stadia or any other Google service launches, you always see an immediate slowdown in development and features. It's because all experienced and ambitious engineers leave the project very shortly after launch, because there's no promo food to get anymore. So they leave for a new project or team where they can get more credits towards promo. The people that remain are those that can't easily transfer, aka inexperienced or poor engineers. You see this all the time with Google products. Rapid development and activity until the launch, and then everything grinds to a halt. When I worked at Google in 2012, internally we called it LPA, Launch, Promo, Abandon. Yes, this is how we described it internally at Google. Another insider at Google echoed the sentiment. Google features 0 penalties for fucking shit up. Do you know what the people who wasted 2 years on Google Allo got after it was canned? Nothing. Some got promoted. Google greatly encourages launches, releasing something publicly. And keep in mind, no penalties if this shit is half-baked, not working, only working on Chrome or some such nonsense. This is the norm. Why? Promotion. You can't get promoted beyond a certain level in this place unless you launch something big. What do you get when you add all these perverse incentives? 9,883 chat apps and a never-ending chain of redesigns and relaunches so some people can get promoted. You know how many bugs you need to fix to get promoted? Infinity. No matter how many you fix, it will never get you enough impact for promotion. How many useless redesigns do you need to launch to get promoted? 1. People internally usually warn about this shit, complain about it, file bugs about performance, etc. It's all ignored. Most people who have been here for over a few years have given up filing bugs, because the reply is always the same. You're not the target audience, and we all know it. Some quit when they realize it. Others begin optimizing for promotion as opposed to optimizing for what is good for the user or the company. And this is how you get the new Gmail, for example. Google looks like, on the outside, the 2020s equivalent of Blockbuster Video. Grew too fast, too quickly, isn't adapting to its own size, isn't cutting out the rot within its own company and culture. At the top, Google thinks it can do no wrong. It is the axis on which the world turns. Anything with the Google label slapped onto it must be good. And if there's problems, it's other people sabotaging it. At the bottom, though, Google is filled with people existing within the husk of a once functional institution, fighting over scraps, focusing only on building one-person staircases for themselves rather than actually fixing the place up. The Google Stadia disaster was inevitable, and I'm glad I didn't get on board. Even just showing off the shit show on my gaming stream, I don't think it would have been worth it for me, frankly. Oh well, Stadia subjects are making the migration over to Amazon's cloud gaming service, the Amazon Luna. Surely the exact same shit won't happen again. This'll be fine.